Back up here now, and we are connected. Let me just make sure that we're online. I can't. That's the first time that's happened, man. Hang on one second. All right, guys, if you're still with us, I sincerely apologize. We just had a power outage here. We're back. We are back. Steven's with me. Steven, I just had a panic attack. I didn't know what to do. I mean, but what was the last thing that we were talking at? Because we were right on this great point.
We were talking about will technology make us more lonely or more connected? And especially with brain interface connect technology. God, I hate to say this stuff out loud because it sounds so strange, but it seems like we're going to be they've linked people already together who can play video games telepathically. We can now control drones telepathically. With brain-computer interfaces, not telepathically, but we're using EEG signals and things along those lines. But we're controlling drones. We're playing video games over the internet. We're sending words back and forth. There was an experiment a couple of years ago where they literally sent thoughts from France to India and back and forth over the internet using BCI technology.
Mm-hmm.
This is a level of connectivity that, we don't even know that's you and me inside the same head together. That's where the technology is moving. That's where people are pushing it. And that's where billions and billions of dollars of investment is flowing in to this stuff too, right? Because a lot of this technology is being developed so we have a chance to compete with AI. That's the thinking, right? We need this technology because we need to supercharge our brains because we're going to be in a world with AI and we need to keep up. And that's the thinking. And there are a lot of people deeply committed to it. And a lot of the people who are deeply committed are really, really wealthy and really worried about this problem. And they're spending their money on it. And so as science fiction as all this sounds to me, it's all moving. And even at a lesser level in Stealing Fire, I talk about, I spent time at USC with Ellie, who is the first AI psychologist that was ever developed. And Ellie was built by the Department of Defense because they had a rising problem of soldier suicide. Mm-hmm. And the best way to kind of solve soldier suicide is early diagnostics, right? You want to look for warning signs of PTSD, late onset PTSD especially, and depression. And the best way to do that is an interview with a psychologist or sociologist. And there was no way to scale it up. They went, holy crap, we can't scale it up. We got to deal with this problem. Can we build a diagnostic AI? And they built Ellie. And Ellie literally can read 60. This is 4 years ago, when I sat down with Ellie. And then she was reading 60 different vocal cues, facial cues, biometrics, physiological indicators. Back then, Ellie knew me better than I knew myself. And the conversation, right? Ellie, you look at the screen, Ellie looks like a 35-year-old Hispanic woman. That's like it's an avatar, but that's what she looks like, conservatively dressed. And crazy stuff. One, soldiers actually prefer talking to Ellie than they do talking to regular psychologists.
Wow.
And two, Ellie as a diagnostic tool, again, 4 years ago, was at like 80%. And psychologists aren't even that good. And it was getting better and better over time. And this same kind of technology is being built into autonomous cars. And you're like, well, why the hell would you do that? This is another thing I talk about in the last Tango. But if Uber is rolling out autonomous taxis in major cities this year, right? Robot taxis, no drivers. Mm-hmm. And if you're an autonomous taxi, you need to be able to read human emotion at a distance. So they have programmed in the LiDAR sensors on top of them. One of the things they're scanning for is human facial expressions. And they're scanning it because if you're angry and you're 100 feet in front of an autonomous car, you're much more likely to jump into traffic than if you're calm, right? So the autonomous cars have to be able to read her facial expressions so they don't kill people. And we do this automatically. Our cars have to do this. So one, it is somebody's job to program in, emotional reading capabilities into these AIs, which I think is fascinating and amazing. It's probably going to have all kinds of unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've spent so much time on AI, and And wow, it's that fascinating because it's so emergent. It's right around the corner. It seems like there's more and more coming out about it every day. But something that I wanted to bring up as well that you mentioned in the book was genetics, gene splicing. You talk about sort of editing, your children, kids, and sort of how do you see this? How do you view this as far as the future and what's coming technologically, as far as picking what we want as the traits of our offspring?
So I don't know. I don't go. I look at a couple different things in genetics in the book. It's not core to my thinking. But when I always talk about this, I think the fear, right? The big fear is Gattaca, right? The big fear is that we're going to end up in some kind of Orwellian super children world or something like that, where everybody is the same, And I remember having this conversation years ago with a brilliant geneticist and synthetic biologist named Andrew Hessel. And he was the head of bioinformatics at Singularity University for a while, and a good friend of mine. And he pointed out, he's like, look, we're not heading into a Gattaca world because our people are endlessly unique and endlessly creative. And if we do start designing our babies, everybody's going to want their babies to be unique, just like everyone wants a unique name for their kids these days, and blah, blah, blah. And I thought that was interesting. I thought the idea of our children becoming sort of creative projects in that way. We would design children in the way we would design houses or something like that was a really fascinating, wild idea to me. So that was one of the things that kind of put into the book. But I always say that, like, the stuff that's coming that's really interesting to me are like human animal hybrids and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
The point I make in the book is that I think that hybridization, because you've already got projects right now underway to try to develop cat's eyes for humans,
Mm-hmm.
and ornamental, and then there's other stuff like that already underway. So we're going to start seeing that, and I see that as kind of the next version of punk rock. It seems like every generation wants to out-rebel the previous generation. So we started out with hippies who had long hair and funny clothes, and then we went to the punks who had really strange hair, and they're starting to pierce their bodies and tattoo their bodies. So the modifications are becoming permanent. And then we got in, much heavier body modification stuff. And now you have implants and biohackers implanting technology into their bodies, and that's sort of the cutting edge, the most punk rock thing going on. And I think we're going to see human animal hybrids as kind of the next version of punk rock rebellion. I think that's the next 10 to 15 years as well.
Wow. I've always loved your work, Stephen. I really liked Rise of Superman. This was definitely an interesting read, and it's clear you have this ability to look at these different emerging technologies and sort of combine them into a really amazing story. There's a question from the audience that if I don't ask, people are going to get mad at me. Thomas wants to know, ask Stephen about cannabis and where it is best used in our modern culture. What should stoners be doing, in his opinion? Playing videos? Question mark.
Okay, so a couple things you should know about cannabis that are really important. Cannabis produces state-dependent learning, which is to say, like, you've heard about state-dependent learning.
Sure.
If you study for the SATs in purple sweats, you should take them in purple sweats, right? That's state-dependent learning on a certain level. But a deeper version of it is cannabis, meaning people, especially with psychedelics and mind-altering substances, they think it's automatic. Oh, I take this pill and it's going to do this thing. And the truth of the matter is that most people, when they smoke pot, they sort of want to sit on a couch and eat Cheetos and laugh with their friends and watch movies or whatever, right? Because that's what they did in high school. So that's what they trained their brains to do with the substance. But you can just as easily retrain your brain to use cannabis for creativity, for for work, for any of those things. It just takes training and practice. And I say this as a guy who was never really a cannabis user until I got Lyme disease and spent 3 years in bed with Lyme disease. And literally, when I was coming back from Lyme disease, my biggest problem was I couldn't focus, I couldn't write, and I couldn't make any money, right? Because I couldn't keep my head together. And Rick Doblin, who runs MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Medicine, I've known Rick for forever.
Sure.
And we hadn't talked for a little while at that point. And I got on the phone with him, and he found out I had Lyme. He was like, well, are you using medical marijuana? And I was like, well, no, are you crazy? Like, my problem is I can't focus. Like, why would I ever want to use marijuana? He started laughing. He's like, no, Stephen, you're doing it wrong. What are you talking about? And he literally designed a protocol and taught me, starting with very micro, like half hit a pot for 45 minutes kind of, and train yourself up. And it took a while, you know what I mean? For like the first 2 weeks, what I was writing was freaking gobbledygook, and I was like, this is never going to work. I mean, I feel better than I was, but this is never going to work. And then like two and a half weeks in, my brain went, oh my God, this is how you do this stoned. Okay, I got it. And suddenly my workday went from half hour, 45-minute focus sessions when I was really sick with Lyme to 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours. And I owe my career to this.
Wow.
So the idea that to me, cannabis is about, creativity and work. It is, I don't know if Thomas was prompted by there was an article that came out in Forbes yesterday about me. We at the Flow Research Collective have teamed up with Ojai Energetics, which is a cannabis company, really great, fantastic science, and some researchers at UCLA, and we're doing the first ever deep dive into the relationship between flow and cannabis. There's all kinds of anecdotal evidence. There's a lot of overlap between with the endocannabinoid system. And so we're on the front end of what's probably going to be, I think we have 3 years of funding, but it's probably going to be a 5-year research project by the time we get to where we want to go. But I think this is really cool and interesting work, and it's going to teach us a lot about human consciousness, I think.
Stephen, man, we're over time. I really appreciate these conversations that we have together, man. They flow by. It's just perfect, and we cover so much. But I feel like there's so much that we could have covered more. Is there anything before we wrap this up? Is there anything that you think that we should have touched on that we didn't?
I've got to say nothing. I've got no answer for you. I'll probably tell you dirty jokes. No, ask a better final question.
Okay. Well, I
don't know what to do with the open-ended question.
Okay.
I'm not a guy who likes to give advice or tell other people how to live or what things mean or anything else. So I don't have words of wisdom that way. I'm not good with an open-ended question. I'm better focused.
Got it. So, okay, here's a focus question. Where can people find your work? Where can people go and buy the book?
Whatever you want, you can find on StephenKotler.com, which is StephenKotler.com. And two things to know. If you go to under the words tab, because I'm too freaking lazy to create a separate video tab, you will find a video tab. And under the video tab, you'll find 10, 12 hours of videos about, every little bit of the conversation that you and I have been having kind of expanded out. And there's also the rabbit hole. So if I said something about exponential technology that got you curious and you want to know more, there's an exponential technology rabbit hole. If I said something about flow or consciousness, there's a there's a tab on my website that says the rabbit hole. And there are just sections. And here's 4 articles I've written, 4 videos, and a little podcast or whatever. It's sort of a fun way to go through the material. So that's all free, and that's all there on the website.
We'll make sure that people get a hold of that. I want to respond to your question, Stephen, because I felt like you gave me a chance. I don't want to lose that. I wanted to ask you, last thing, I wanted to ask you about relationships, love, and virtual reality. Because, okay. It seems like culture has changed so much with Tinder, swiping left or right. Do you think that, having an artificial intelligent girlfriend would be something of a solution for those people that are lonely?
Kurzweil fantasy.
Yeah. So, what do you think about that?
Well,
there's got to be something to like programming.
So Let me back it up one. I don't want to go quite that far. I just, we're talking one of the other migrations I write about in the book is the migration into the virtual. And I think there are three big drivers that are going to drive us into the virtual. And I really do believe whether it's through VR or by the way, the holodeck, Star Trek holodeck, the most far out future, like it's being built. Holograms are real, and they figured out how to build a holographic room projector. And some of the keenest minds in Hollywood are currently building a holodeck, and they think we're going to have the first one by 2030. So, welcome to your future. But that's besides the point. I think haptics are getting really good, and there's a whole. I mean, since the '80s, there's been literally a field called dildonics, which is exactly what you think it is, right? Exactly what you think it is.
Okay.
No surprise here. And it's so, sex haptics basically have been around since the 80s, and they're getting really good. Porn is a big driver of technology. And we already know, like, avatars make things really interesting. And when you start coupling avatars with haptics, with a slew of consciousness altering drugs, I don't even think we're getting to AI relationships. Right. I think VR. I mean, yes, somebody's going to build the perfect robot husband or robot girl. Those things are going to happen over time, of course. But I really think VR is going to shift that stuff more than I think AI or robotics will. And I could be totally wrong, but that's my thinking.
Steven, I really appreciate your presence so much, man. Guys, the book is called Last Tango in Cyberspace. My guest, Steven Kotler, is the author. You can find his work, stevenkotler.com. That's going to do it for us for this week. We will certainly be back next week. If you're not subscribed to us already, if you're listening to this on YouTube, click the subscribe button, click the bell button so you can be notified when we go live. If you're listening to this on the podcast version, get to iTunes and leave us a review. It helps us, stay in the rankings. One of the best compliments that you can give us is just recommending this show to your friends and getting the word out there for us. But that's going to do it for us here, folks, for this show. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening.